Hey folks, this is Ronnie Turner with your weekly prophecy update. This week we've got some news clip highlights from the Jim Bakker Show, and with some commentary from Zach Drew and the whole crew at the Jim Bakker Show. So we're going to start out with that and let you see kind of what's going on in the world and how it relates to what the Bible says, what's coming ahead for us. So let you take a look at that.
You know, it's from actually Washington Times, and it says here, North Korea EMP attack could destroy U.S. now. And you see, the EMP bomb, it's a special type of nuclear warhead that is detonated 100, 200, 300 miles above Earth. And this type of EMP bomb is created to give off more special type of gamma rays than the regular nuclear warhead for the purpose of emitting a larger, stronger EMP type of force. And it says North Korea now has an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of delivering a nuclear weapon to the United States, as demonstrated. They actually demonstrated it. They have already tested it. In fact, North Korea is a mortal nuclear threat to the United States right now. North Korea has already successfully tested and developed nuclear weapons. It has also already miniaturized nuclear weapons for ballistic missile delivery. North Korea has labored for years and starved its people so it could develop an intercontinental missile capable of reaching the United States. Why? Because they have a special kind of nuclear weapon that could destroy the United States with a single blow. We have Newt Gingrich saying no one should kid themselves. With the Sony collapse, America has lost its first cyber war. This is a very dangerous precedent. And Mitt Romney says this to Sony Pictures: don't cave, we've got to fight. I mean, they're literally challenging a communist country is challenging the great United States of America's free speech, and we're bowing to them?
They're threatening now to kill any theater owner that runs this motion picture. This guy warns of possible Iran cyber attack on the U.S. defenses and energy institutions.
Here from CNN, it says the U.S. government thinks China could take down the power grid. China and probably one or two other countries have the capacity to shut down the nation's power grid and other critical infrastructure through cyber attack. The head of National Security Agency told the congressional panel, look up, this is a credible source, you need to look it up, it's from Natural News, and this is the headline. It says, deadly Fukushima radiation up 50,000% as elevated radiation levels seen across North America.
That's North
All
America.
right, there you go.
Right.
There's a kind of a synopsis of what's gone on the last couple of weeks in the news, and interesting commentary on how all that ties to what the Bible says and what we can expect to see coming in the near future. So next I got a clip from Prophecy in the News, and it's a Bible scholar by the name of Bill Salas, who has a couple of best-selling novels, and he's given his latest summary on the study he's doing currently on a seldom known prophecy about Elam, which is actually the southwestern part of Iran. And I thought it was pretty interesting that he's tying that to the events that are going on in Iran today, involving the nuclear program and their nuclear plants, and then combining that with the uncertainty we're seeing as far as the earthquakes, the increase in the number of earthquakes, and the fact that they've built this on a fault line. Not just one, but where several come together. So like he mentions, it's a recipe for disaster. So that was pretty interesting, and he gives a lot of details about the nuclear power plant and Iran's program that you won't hear in the news. And he's actually looking at the book of Jeremiah, and the scripture that he quotes comes from there, and he ties that to what's going on currently. in that portion of Iran. So check this out.
Our guest is an intriguing Bible scholar and student of prophecy. He's taken the prophetic world by storm in the last few years with a book that's the bestseller we've ever had here at Prophecy in the News. It's Psalm 83, and it's about the nations surrounding Israel and conflict coming there. And now our guest, Bill Salas, has come out with a new book, and it's called Nuclear Showdown with Iran. I want to welcome Bill.
Bible prophecies are invaluable predictive information given to us from a loving God with 100% accuracy. And he doesn't give us these prophecies because he wants to impress us, but to inform us because he loves us. So he's got prophecies that he's given to the prophets in centuries past that were intended to be discerned to equip us with information, or certain generations with information that they needed to have to best steward their lives and prepare for these types of things. And so these prophecies were not going to go without being discerned.
Right.
And we've found a couple of them in Psalm 83, and you've been presenting that book, The Missing Prophecy Revealed. And I'm excited you're presenting the new book, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, revealing the ancient prophecy of Elam. That's not a refrigerator magnet. That's not a bumper sticker. So we're going to introduce what's Elam to everybody.
Well, tell us what that is.
Okay. Well, Elam is the grandson of Noah. He was the son of Shem. He had settled in the area of modern-day Iran that hugs the Persian Gulf.
All right.
You know, the Elamites go way back to the time of, like I said, Noah and Shem. We find out in Genesis 14 when that they were warmongers, because there was that episode that Genesis 14 points out where 5 kings came against 4 kings, and in the midst of that battle, Abraham's nephew Lot got kidnapped.
Exactly.
Well, Abraham, of course, rescued Lot, but we find out that one of the kings was King Chedorlaomer of Elam. They were warmongers. We find out in Isaiah 22, approximately 1,300 years later, that they're expert archers. So they had a period of time where they were perfecting their skills as warmongers, and of course the weapon of preferred choice to them was the bow, which makes sense when you start to talk about this prophecy. It talks about he's going to break the bow of Elam. It hits right at the core of something very important.
You know, before we go further, this might be a place for us to look at this prophecy. And if
Yeah.
you'll allow me, I'll read it to us and just refresh us in it. And
Okay.
you might follow along there on the screen with the words. Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39. The word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet against Elam in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might, and upon Elam will I bring the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds. And there shall be no nation whither the outcasts of Elam shall not come. That's a fascinating word, and we'll get to that.
Yes.
For I will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, and before them that seek their life, and I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, saith the Lord. And I will send the sword after them, till I have consumed them. And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, saith the Lord. But it shall come to pass in the latter days, that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. And this prophecy has never been historically fulfilled.
It has not, and in the book I go to great lengths to point that out. And so therefore, as we come to the conclusions from the research I've drawn, we're looking at a prophecy that I believe is imminent. The stage is set for this prophecy to find its fulfillment. You know, there's only 6 verses, but they're very potent, and I think very timely for us right now. The first 4 verses are dealing with bad news for Iran. Appears to be almost a nuclear showdown, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But like you said, the last 2 verses are good news for Iran. God is going to set his throne in Elam. That's exciting.
It is exciting.
And the Hebrew word is kiseh, K-I-S-S-E. It's the same word used in Isaiah 66. It says, Heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool.
Beautiful.
And Jeremiah 3, verses 16, 17 in that area, where we find out that Jerusalem will be the throne of the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that all about? Well, we'll try to talk about what is that tricky little statement there. But he does say in that verse he's going to kill from there the kings and the princes also. We got bad leadership that we're dealing with there.
We're dealing with that today.
Yeah, and then he says he will bring back the captives. We'll talk about. Those are the good news for Iran there. There's a spiritual showdown going in Iran right now, too, between a battle between Christianity and Islam. And Iran is the #1 growing evangelical population in the world. So we've got a whole lot to talk about. You know, when you look at the map of modern-day Iran, you've got Elam and you've got Persia. They comprise most of Elam. Elam hugs the Persian Gulf. It's about 1/5 of modern-day Iran. The other 4/5 would be Persia. Most of the prophecy in the news viewers are going to be familiar with Persia's future and Bible prophecy because of Ezekiel 38,
Right.
that Gog of Magog invasion, where in verse 5 we see Persia is listed. Now, Iran used to be called Persia until they renamed it in 1935. So Ezekiel, who was a contemporary of Jeremiah, writes about Persia in a very important prophecy, but Jeremiah writes about Elam. And it's very interesting.
The distinction.
Yeah, I point out in the book that they're not one and the same prophecy. Jeremiah is not giving more details to Ezekiel's, and I give reasons why we can draw that conclusion reasonably. But so Jeremiah is dealing with a very powerful prophecy, distinctly different. So Iran has double trouble, a double jeopardy in the end times, and Elam is where that Bashar nuclear plant is, which is a nuclear disaster waiting to happen. So in these 6 verses, we have 7 I wills that God is going to do. And what we find out is that God, like you said, is fiercely angered. That's a very, very troubling situation. He told Jeremiah at some point in time, he was going to be really angry with Iran. And he wasn't angry with Iran during Jeremiah's time, but he's angry with Iran right now. So we ask ourselves, well, what's he angry about? Well, we just talked, he's going to destroy some kings and princes as part of this prophecy. We've got a bad leadership issue because good leadership does not get destroyed by the Lord.
Right.
Well, presently Iran has some really bad leadership. They do not worship the God of the Bible. We find out also he's going to break the bow of Elam. Well, okay, so if he's upset with the leadership and he's going to take the bow out of their arsenal, why is that? Well, he must be wanting to launch something somewhere. Get rid of that problem right now. So they can't launch something, this bad leadership. Well, right now Iran's working on a very advanced ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles program, which the only purpose you have ICBMs is to put a nuclear warhead in them. Now, although Iran can hit anywhere in Israel right now with the missiles they have, concerns are, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel was trying to warn America that with an ICBM and a nuclear weapon, they could hit the east coast of America, and he's saying that could even actually happen in 2015. So as we start to unpack this prophecy, we're going to see more and more that it appears to be dealing with Iran. Well, it's interesting when we talk about the geopolitics, they have been negotiating with the international community since they decided they would do that in November of 13. They had a deadline from July of 2014. They missed that deadline. They extended it out to November of 2014. So they are negotiating with what they call the P5+1, the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, which for your viewers would be Russia, China, France, Britain, the United States, and +1 would be Germany, but with no avail. See, Iran, the makers of chess, are negotiating their way to a nuclear weapon.
Well, you mentioned chess because that board game is supposed to have come from there, and they think ahead. They think and plot and plan moves ahead.
Yeah,
They're playing a chess match with us in negotiation. That's what I'm hearing you say.
and they're winning. Here's a couple of the examples of that. The July 2014 deadline came and went, and instead of tightening sanctions on Iran, they were able to get $2.8 billion of unfrozen assets. They don't meet the deadline this recent November of 2014. Now, over the next 7 months, which they're going to try to extend the talks for another 7 months, they're getting another, we estimate, $6 billion+ that's going to be released over that 7 months. And I asked the people when I add this up and do the math, we're talking about almost $9 billion that's going to be released by the end of the next 7 months from what they've already gotten. And how many ICBMs and centrifuges can you build and spend for $9 billion? It's very, very troubling. But I'm not so sure Israel's going to allow Iran to go much further. This is a concern.
That's the thought of a lot of us. The Israelis have always been chess masters, shall I say. I think they're gifted by God with an incredible amount of wisdom and even cunning in a good sense of that word. And they are not going to idly stand by and let their people be destroyed in their nation.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of concerns right now in the Middle East with ISIS, of course, and Israel just had to fend off 3,000 missiles beginning in July of 2014 over a 50-day span. You know, it's not like there's not a lot of hornets' nests over there in the Middle East, but you've been seeing for quite some time now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying the elephant in the room in his neighborhood is Iran's nuclear program. He is warning the world.
He is.
To watch out for this.
And he spoke in no uncertain terms, I think, to the United Nations recently, you know, about his concerns, and he didn't mince any words.
Yeah, and Israel has basically threatened on several occasions that they will take matters in their own hands and they will strike Iran's nuclear program. Now, they have a precedent of doing that.
Yes, they do.
Kevin, in 1980, 1981, they hit Osirak region where Saddam Hussein was building a nuclear facility. And then in 2007, they hit the Syrian site, the Al-Kabar area, in September of 2007. So, you know, they can't allow their enemies to get a nuclear weapon because they are a very small place. It's a matter of survival for them. And a nuclear weapon in the hands of the people that don't want Israel to exist, they don't recognize Israel as a Jewish state, is just a disaster waiting to happen that they will not take a chance with.
And you know, the concerns I've read about Israel right now are that Iran's, you know, nuclear development is taking place deep in the caves of the earth. They've got underground facilities. They're on to Israel in that sense, so they've taken some preemptive measures of their own. But do you know what Israel is currently doing to try to be ready for a strike like this?
Right. This is not going to be an easy fix for Israel. It's a very complex nuclear program. It's well concealed and hidden. Israel covertly has been trying to slow down the program. You know, there was a period of time where there was a Stuxnet virus that really slowed down things. There have been explosions near some of the nuclear facilities. There have been some assassinations of nuclear scientists. You might say that Israel's had some conspicuous fingerprints on those, but again, you know, there's been no real claim on that. But,
and our viewers may not be aware of this, but if I can interject this.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Stuxnet. Fascinating story came out, even on the main wire services when that happened, that, of course, what that was a computer sabotage.
Absolutely.
They prepare and actually develop, I think some 90% of the world's microchips are developed in Israel. And so some of their best minds created this saboteur element that would just stop the program and freeze it in Iran. But I heard that on the Iranian copy, it was actually named not Stuxnet, as we call it, but Hadassah. Well, to our viewers who may not know Hebrew names as well, Hadassah is the Hebrew name for a young lady you know as Queen Esther. And Esther was her name in Persia. And we fast forward to our day, and they cryptically named this code Hadassah because, again, being saved from a Persian threat of extermination.
Yeah, isn't it interesting when we talk about conspicuous fingerprints?
Very.
Was this a little reminder to a historical past of Iran where similar bad leadership was also considering genocide of the Jewish people at that point in time? I found that little tidbit of wisdom when it came out quite fascinating.
I did too. I was arrested by it.
Yeah, and since we're talking about the history, if you go about 50 years before Prime Minister Haman, Persia was actually a anointed empire initially by the Lord. Matter of fact, King Cyrus was written about by Isaiah, who wrote between 740 and 701 BC, by name. He was called the anointed king. He was called the Lord's shepherd.
Yes.
And remember that the story there was Jeremiah had come out before King Nebuchadnezzar had taken the Jews into 70 years of Babylonian captivity. And he warned them, you're going to be disciplined as a nation and you're going to go into 70 years of captivity. And sure enough, they did. First deportation around 609 BC. And then 70 years later in 539 BC, it had to be 70 years, it could have been 68 years or 72
God knows his math.
Yeah, God can't be, taking a little guesswork here. Here comes King Cyrus, who now conquers the Babylonians, and when this Isaiah prophecy was brought to his attention, by name for him, it shaped his kingship for the future. He immediately said, I'll send the Jews back, and in fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy. And he was a good king. This is a point I want your viewers to understand. He was a good king. He built his empire by hiring the Babylonians and the Elamites and whoever else to help build his empire. He was the first one to write the right of nations for people. He was a good king. 50 years later, unfortunately, we get Prime Minister Haman. And the reason I point this out, Kevin, is because the prophecy that we're dealing with in Jeremiah 49 talks about bad leadership. He's going to destroy from there the kings and the princes. And I go on TV quite a bit, satellite TV, reaching into Iran, because they get satellite TV, and many, many people are coming to the Lord over there. And I let them know of the importance of prophecy, the importance of their king Cyrus. He was a good king. And if only they had that kind of kingship now, we wouldn't even have to be concerned about their nuclear program, and Israel wouldn't have to be concerned about being wiped off the map. But we don't have that right now.
No, we don't.
We don't have that. We have a very dangerous, repressive regime that is repressing Christianity, repressing their own people with social injustice. If you don't wear your hijab, if you're a woman, your headdress, you're going to be thrown in jail. I mean, it is unbelievable what's going on over there.
And then they're committed to the annihilation of Israel. So those are the reasons you think God's so angry with them.
I do. I think that's one of the reasons. And the reason it might have nuclear implications is when you go into the next verse, it talks about he will, against the Elam, he will call the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and he will scatter them toward all those winds. And he says there'll be no nation where the outcasts of Elam, these exiles, will not go. Now, that is a worldwide dispersion. What could cause in that area the need to disperse out into the nations of the world? And it's got to be deeper than what we have a modern day example of in Syria. Now, there's been revolution going on for almost 4 years now in Syria, and there have been about 3 million Syrians displaced, but not into every nation of the world. They have gone out of the borders of Syria into Turkey, into Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, even and a little bit in Egypt.
Neighboring areas.
Neighboring local dispersion.
But not global.
Not global. So we're talking about a real get out of Dodge type scenario here where they've got to go out into the nations of the world. And that leads us into this Bashar nuclear reactor scenario, because it says in the next verse, verse 37, I will, because I'm fiercely angered, I will bring a disaster. And we're talking an epic biblical disaster on the area. And so what could that be? Well, when you look at this Bashar nuclear reactor, let's just talk about that for a minute. Can I take a moment to talk about
please tell us.
Okay. This is a facility that is built where 3 tectonic plates emerge. I often joke around when I talk about this at the conferences. It's like in America, when you're looking for a prime piece of real estate, there's 3 magic words. Location, location, location. But somehow these guys must have thought tectonic, tectonic, tectonic. And Iran is 90% seismic. As a matter of fact,
90% seismic?
It is.
That's amazing.
Serious earthquakes throughout their history. And even as recently as April of last year, 2013, they had a 6.7, 6.8. Right at Bashar, killed 37 people. Followed a week later, not too far away, more toward the Pakistan border of Iran, 7.1. And I want to talk about what that did to the Arab states on the other side of the Gulf a little bit too. But the facility, back to the Bashar nuclear facility, it's the crown jewel of Iran's nuclear program.
And you're saying they put it on this fault line?
3 tectonic plates converge. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
It is.
It's loaded with Russian fuel rods as of August of 2010. And when former UN Ambassador John Bolton heard that those were going in there, he said Israel's window period to strike Iran was shut when they're in there, because a strike on that facility would create a nuclear disaster. And we're not talking about a Chernobyl type scenario. We're talking about a really major bad situation. Now, the facility began to be built by Germans before the revolution, the Ayatollah revolution in 1979. But they left, when that happened. So the Iranians tried to start building on that facility, but they couldn't complete it, so they contracted the Russians in 1995. So you got German, Iranian, and Russian parts on a 40-year-old facility with a 30-year-old cooling system, and no one trained in there to handle a nuclear disaster like we had with Fukushima or somewhere like
the Japanese location.
Yeah. So it's a nuclear disaster waiting to happen. Israel is threatening to strike it. They've been waiting for the midterm elections to sway Republican in November of this 2014, which they did. feeling that there would be a little more Israeli sentiment should they strike. They've been waiting for the nuclear negotiations to come to a conclusion. Well, November has come and gone. On November 24th, that deadline was met of 2014.
So to ask an obvious question, if there was a strike on this region, could it not trigger a massive earthquake?
A massive earthquake could follow. If the facility was struck, it could create a nuclear disaster. An earthquake could create a nuclear disaster. A strike on the facility could shake the tectonic plates and create a nuclear disaster with the earthquake. So anyway, several scenarios could happen, and I really feel for the people in the Bouchard province, who I happen to know, many of them are some of the kindest Iranians around. Many of them are Christians over there in that area. And I really feel for them because a lot of them are very poverty-stricken. It's very difficult for them to vacate the area. So very concerning. But because of the earthquakes we were talking about that recently happened, the other concern of the Arabs across the Gulf, 2/3 of the world's desalinization plants are in those Arab states of Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Oman. They're called the GCC, the Gulf Cooperative Council. I'm going to be talking a lot about this at the conference that you folks are putting together in Orlando. I'm going to unpack this prophecy for them. And we've got a lot of information on the DVD that comes with the book you're going to be talking about.
Let me just mention that right now.
Let's take that moment, and I want to come back and talk about the dangers.
Let's come back to this. But
now, the Arabs were so concerned across the Gulf because drinking in potable water is about as rare a commodity as you can have over there. When these earthquakes came, they conducted a very exhaustive study, an expensive study, and their conclusions and findings were this, Kevin. And what that is that in 15 hours, the radiation could come across the Mediterranean and through the way wind patterns blow and affect 40 to 100% of their Arab populations over there. Now, a lot of those Arab populations right now are involved in President Obama's coalition of pinprick strikes on ISIS over there. Can you imagine what they would do if all of a sudden something was brewing across the Gulf with the Bashar nuclear reactor? They would have to get out of Obama's coalition and go take care of their populations. 40 to 100% of their populations they're concerned about. On the flip side, they're saying only about 10% of Iran's population in the affected area could be affected because of the wind patterns, but there's this mountain range there called the Zagros Mountains, about 550 miles long, 150 miles wide, that would kind of keep the radioactive fallout from going over to Tehran and into Persia proper, because they've got to be intact for Ezekiel 38 and 39. So we're talking about a specific area right here dealing with Elam. So what the Arabs decided to do, and I'll finish with this on this spot here, they decided to build a 1,242-mile pipeline, the world's largest pipeline, not for oil, Kevin, but for water purposes. It's going to go inland, and they won't be reliant on the Persian Gulf. It's going to cost them about $10.5 billion. They want it done as quick as possible, which will be probably around 2020.
All right, there you go. Kind of an eye-opening prophecy that is seldom heard or seldom taught. And yet it's pretty amazing that it's there, and as Bible believers we know that the prophecy is going to come true. So it's something for us to keep our eyes on. We know Iran is kind of a national, I won't say a hindrance, but just their government has a lot of problems, which our government does too, but it's something we need to keep an eye on and be aware of. So I thought that was really interesting and good information for everybody to see. So that's all we've got for this week. So hope you enjoyed it, and hope you'll tune back in next week for another update, and hope you have a great week.